Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you tuning in from all around the world. I'm so sorry for the delay. There were some unforeseen technical difficulties, but we are here now. And welcome to a really exciting How to Academy live stream. We are joined tonight by the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., founder and president of the Rainbow Push Coalition, and one of America's foremost civil rights, religious, and political figures. Over the past 40 years, Reverend Jackson has played a pivotal role in virtually every movement in the United States for empowerment, peace, civil rights, gender equality, and social justice. Tonight, Reverend Jackson will be in conversation with David Maciotra, critic, commentator, and lecturer who has written for the Washington Post, The Atlantic, and has most recently completed a biography entitled I Am Somebody, Why Jesse Jackson Matters. After about a half an hour conversation, Reverend Jackson will take questions from you, the audience, so please type any you have in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Well, that's more than enough from me. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to welcome Jesse Jackson and David Maciotra. David, over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everyone tuning in, and thank you, Reverend, for agreeing to sit down and answer some questions today. As Luke was kind enough to mention, my new book, as you can see right here, published by IB Tauris, is I Am Somebody, Why Jesse Jackson Matters. And I first met Reverend Jesse Jackson 6 years ago, and the book is, in many ways, a product of a 6-year ongoing conversation that I have to say, Reverend, is probably the best conversation I've ever had. And I'm hoping that this program tonight, which the How To Academy is kind enough to host and sponsor, will provide all of our viewers a glimpse into the insight and the leadership that has defined your adult life and has made you a pivotal and powerful force for peace, justice, democracy, and equality in the United States and around the world. And I know that all of our viewers are eager to hear from you. So let me get to our first question. I want to start out broadly, and then maybe we can get into some of the specifics of your major battles and achievements that I document and describe in the book. Democracy is a danger to any illegitimate or insidious power system. Whether it's an economic power system or political power system, democracy is a threat to it. In many ways, you've dedicated your life to the activation and enhancement of democracy. So as we sit here in a moment of converging crises, climate change, COVID-19, inequality, the recrudescence of fascist movements, what are some of the contradictions and troubles that democracy faces, and how can we work to resolve them?
Well, in America, for 240 years, we were in slavery, 240 years, slavery, slaveocracy. The people who made Cotton King and who built America's economy, this was without wages on the captivity. And then there was a war between the states, and Lincoln freed us, but we saved Lincoln. He freed us. We left the southern plantations and joined the Union Army, and of course, we won the battle. We were betrayed in 1877. We went from that to what they call Jim Crow, where blacks had no rights, whites bound and respect. We were lynched for 50 years, lynch mobs. Then in 1954, the law changed. The Supreme Court ruled apartheid was illegal. It didn't change the culture, it changed the law. So the King emerged the next year, 1955, along with Rosa Parks, trying to bring down those barriers. In 1965, we got the right to vote. That was the most pivotal thing, was the right to vote. Since the right to vote, we've exploded on the political scene. And we determined the last president, and we really determined Clinton as well, Senator Barack, and now Joe Biden.
Yeah, it's quite a journey. As you have often said, hands that pick cotton now pick presidents. And you're correct about that surge of black voters gave Obama his victory, gave Biden his victory. In many ways, go ahead, Reverend.
The black vote was key to coalition vote. We were by color apparently locked out, but there was locked out as well. Blacks could vote to 1965, 100 years after 1865. Where women in the South couldn't serve on juries. 18-year-olds who served in Vietnam could not vote. Couldn't vote on college campus, you couldn't vote bilingually, you could not, Native Americans couldn't vote. In many ways, the majority was locked out because really it was a white male aristocracy in the name of politics, in the name of democracy. And so with that new arrangement of people voting, students and people of color and women, that's how we won in 1992 with Clinton, how we won with Barack in 2008.
And you first became a major part of the battle for Black freedom and equality and the universal franchise in the 1960s. Recently, when we spoke, you said something that was quite profound. You said that referring to yourself and your fellow civil rights activists and leaders, our behavior came out of our predicament. Our predicament didn't come out of our behavior. Could you expound on that for our audience today?
Well, we all know the behavior of black men, seemingly loose, disconnected. That's our predicament. Blacks are more likely to be arrested. Time and crime don't correspond. Black man was executed last night in the States. We live under apartheid conditions. So that's our predicament. Less education, less access to jobs, less access to capital. So our behavior is conditioned by the limitations. So out of the predicament comes our behavior, not because of our behavior, we're in the predicament. Slavery precedes in and out of our behavior. That's my real point.
You referred to the execution last night, and you've also referred to the 2020 presidential election. Before we return to some of your historical victories, what's your read on the contemporary political situation and how much of the Trump movement, as we're in thankfully, the final days of his presidency, was an attempt to beat back much of the progress that you just summarized?
I think we, as a nation, we underestimated how many whites resented the success of Barack Obama. 8 years of economic growth, no scandal and all of that. Smart guy, did all the right things. But the whites learned to resent it. And so in part, Trump tapped into that. Trump was a very talented man who used his power to manipulate views of whites. I remember going to talk to white people when my mother was in the hospital dying in South Carolina. They said, Reverend, I've learned to like you. I said, yes, ma'am. He said, you know, I'm with Affordable Care, I'm not with Obamacare. I said, you like for free mammograms and all that? I said, but Obamacare, you want eggs without eggs? She said, what you mean? I said, well, they put Barack's picture on the book. So Doc said it. Affordable Care and Obamacare is the same thing. And so that name comes out of contempt. That's not meant to be a compliment, you know? And that's a piece of our work. And so Trump in 1987, that was a jogger who was killed, beaten, raped in New York. Took out a full-page ad, executed them, the 5 young black men. They found they were falsely, wrongly convicted, and then set free 5 years later. He still wanted them executed. He's in this anti-black mania. He started off attacking President Barack as not being an American citizen, the birther movement. From that, he began to mimic a physically handicapped writer. The Mexican American judge could not be judicious, could not be fair. Nazis marched in Charlottesville, Virginia. He said they equated them with those who were victims of it. A woman that held a higher skill. So Africa and Haiti were S-holes, shitholes, as it were. He had to stop the border crossing. He separated children from their parents. I mean, just did that kind of stuff. It didn't stop here. He undercut the European alliance. He didn't really support NATO, his role in Europe, for example, as a stabilizing force. He picked a fight with China, our next door neighbors, Canada, and just a kind of a fascist notion. And in some sense, you're looking at a man whose private politics is more like Jefferson Davis, who was the guy who led the charge against American democracy in the 1860s and 1870, a real right winger.
One of the most brilliant and triumphant moments of your career is your, talking about them collectively, is your 2 presidential campaigns. And some of the language that you used during those campaigns was, if we can leave the racial battleground to find economic common ground, we can reach for moral higher ground. And in those campaigns, you brought in whole new constituencies into the Democratic Party, and not just Black voters, but also Latinos and Native Americans and poor white farmers and laborers. What is that economic common ground that you addressed in your 80s campaigns, and that can perhaps heal some of these brutal divisions that now exist within the United States?
Well, family farmers need fair prices, and they can't survive the competition of corporate farmers. Well, Black farmers want the same thing, but they don't live together, they don't know each other. I had to convince white farmers in Iowa. I said, you're complaining about you lost your farm. Blacks in the city, you as being lazy in subsidy. You see them as not working, and they're being lazy. That's not the case. They once worked, corporations took their jobs abroad to cheap labor markets. You want some farming, corporate farmers, non-farmers ate up family farmers. They have a lot in common. So I tried to heal the breach by talking about what they had in common. Today, COVID-19 is ravaging the country. A lot of Blacks have died, but more whites have died numerically. You know, when Trump did a $3.5 tax cut to the top 1%, there was very few people at all. But so trying to find out what is common ground, and actually, the best example of it is the athletic field, where Blacks and whites play football and baseball, basketball so meaningfully here, because the conditions when the playing field is even, rules are public, goals clear, referee fair, scores transparent, we can make it. Those 5 conditions: even playing field, public rules, goals clear, referees fair, scores transparent. So we can get along if in fact we learn to live together. We survived apart, learn to live together. We do that, then we move on to the next issue of economic common ground. Southern farmers, Southern white workers were taught to be anti-union. They worked harder for less money, and they were told, A, they were superior to Black people as a psychological edge. Also, neither got a decent wage according to what they would get collective bargain. So we had to overcome that barrier. So now we're fighting for health care for everybody. That's common ground. And really, it's morally right. It's the moral higher ground as well.
I interviewed your former press secretary, Delmarie Cobb, for the book, I Am Somebody, and she called it a politics of usefulness, showing in a New Deal liberalism, great society fashion, how government can prove itself useful to people, regardless of color or creed or class. Speaking of class and economic issues, Middlebury University, the history department at Middlebury University, calls Operation Breadbasket, which you led and championed in the 60s, and the early work of Operation Push, which you founded, the most important but least told story of the civil rights movement. Could you, and of course I tell it in as much detail as I can in the book, could you, however, give our audience a summary of what was Operation Breadbasket and why was it so important?
We use consumer strength to leverage for business development. That was a piece of it. In other words, and these companies that did business in black community, we were the margin of profit. We couldn't drive trucks, so we negotiated that. Blacks could not get shelf space in the stores. We could not build the stores. We were in a kind of economic exploitation, really, what it was. So we could go to a given company and we negotiate based on our margin of consumption on that margin of jobs, economic opportunities. The result is we began to get products on shelves for the first time. We began to get right to build chain stores, began to get right to be checkout counters and meat cutters and all of what goes into a store. Brett Bass did that. We got the first black auto dealership, Al Johnson Automobile in Chicago. We leveraged GM. And so we kept using, and even today, while we got politically free but not equal, equality will come with economic justice. And we'll have to leverage our dollars as we leverage our votes to make it happen. And I used to go to all the Black Caucus meetings in Washington, political meetings, and people say, well, nothing happened this week. Well, something happened. They met each other, began a real relationship. You really said nothing happened economically. We had to go to Wall Street, which is north of Washington. Our share of capital, industry, technology, deal flow. And that's the stage we're in right now. We politically, we're occupying cities as mayors and the like. You look at it, there's a downtown building owned by Blacks in America. Either in New York or Houston, California or Mississippi. Look at the one you see, a tall building, it's not built by Blacks. Not only that, they couldn't get the capital. John Johnson was the publisher of Ebony and Jet magazines. When he built a 33-story building, he built a 11-story building. He had to pay for it out of his pocket. Herman Russell owned 2 bank boards in Atlanta, Georgia. He had to build this out of his pocket. So if you cannot get credit and trust, you cannot be part of the economic system. So we have to now use our political power to leverage us economically.
And many historians and journalists have studied the work that you led in those years and have concluded that thousands of Black workers earned jobs through your efforts, placement in trade unions, and also there were hundreds of millions of dollars in ancillary benefits from product placement and contracts.
But the key thing, it was not a zero-sum game. As Blacks got involved, it expanded. It didn't take from whites, it expanded the market. Black community represents market, money, talent, location, money, market, talent, location, and growth. So if you use the Black market, you simply have more product to sell. You have more buildings to build. You have more houses to build. You have more workers who have money. So fights have been driven by Blacks are coming, and saying our hopes that coalition wins. These modern politicians, people like Barack Obama, the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, Mayor Bottoms, they walk that tight line between reducing white unfounded fears, keeping Black and brown hopes alive. That's the combination that leadership must embody these days.
That's part of what you did. When we talk about the presidential campaigns in the 80s, we talk about breadbasket and push and the work for economic justice and access and opportunity. And we talk about voting rights. It's dispelling these American myths, the myth of the land of opportunity, the myth of anyone can make it if he lifts himself up by his bootstraps. Another myth that you worked to dispel was that America intervenes around the world in the name of peace and freedom. Because in Iraq, Cuba, Syria, many other countries, you work to free hostages, free political prisoners, and try to prevent war. You're a true internationalist. How did you develop an international sensibility? And why is it that throughout your life and career, you have intervened in foreign conflicts and turmoil?
I try to see the world through a door, not through a keyhole. I was once asked in New Hampshire, told by the chairman of New Hampshire, well, Reverend, you've done pretty well in domestic. Tomorrow night we're going to have foreign politics. You have to show up. try to give deference. I said, I won't talk about international policy. I said, you know, slave trade we came on the national policy, trade policy. So we were always international people, people under subjugation. America's trade was importing Africans and exporting cotton. The strength of America for 246 years, quarter of a century, it seems, it came down to. Another 100 years of Jim Crow, we had just an extension of slavery. So we had to fight back against these odds. With a certain kind of moral stamina, will to fight back. We kept winning, David.
And that's correct. And all of these issues that we're discussing right now, they loom large over the present. So,
Can I make this observation? When I went south during the Bull administration in the 80s, Democrats would not go south. They said, well, we can't win. If a white is replaced by a black, that's not progress. Labor wouldn't go south. They said, right to work laws. We began to expand the black political base. They began to vote. It became attractive to business because they no longer had the apartheid fights about race. Tried to labor because business was going south. Democrats and blacks vote in big numbers, like they voted for Biden in South Carolina and Mississippi, and voted for him in Wisconsin and Michigan in the last campaign, and Pennsylvania to enable him to win. So we changed the dynamic about blacks wouldn't vote and couldn't vote and all that. We should become a better country because of that. And in '84, when I ran, I was not going to run except we were serving Harold Washington, become mayor of Washington, Chicago. And we heard that Ted Kennedy was coming to town and run Monday to support Jane Byrne and Daley in the primary to defeat us. We said, these are our allies. We've been supporting them. They wouldn't support us. I said, somebody needs to run against this. I appealed to Maynard Jackson and the Young. I finally was convinced I had to run. We learned a lot. 450 delegates in that run, and 3.5 million votes. Most of them we registered ourselves. In '88, we found that our delegates did not correspond with our numbers. So we went from what we call wouldn't take all proportionality. That is to say that if I get 48%, you get 49%, you get all 100%. So we changed it, we get proportionality. So in 08, Hillary won California, Texas, Oklahoma, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. She would have been the winner, but we democratized democracy by making the rules proportional, making the rules fair. That's the key to Brock's winning. It was not just social media, but because she still won California. She got all of California, but all of Ohio, Texas, she's won. So we now have people fighting to deal with democracy closer to the people.
Absolutely. And, you know, when some people listening to this program right now, they might hear you talk about economic exploitation and voter suppression, and they might think, you know, Reverend, I want to listen to what you're saying, but I look at President Donald Trump, even though he lost, and I look at the murder of George Floyd and so many others, and the growth of poverty, and it just seems like, you know, nothing is changing. And yet you always have a hopeful message. You end every speech you give with the words, keep hope alive. So what's giving you hope right now that we will begin to advance into the nation that you and Dr. King and John Lewis and so many others began to dream decades ago?
Trump went embarrassingly right to me, embarrassingly right. His disregard for democratic rules and norms, all of that. We defeated him politically. That's hope. The voters' hope. Now there's an African American about to become Secretary of Defense. That's hope. We're growing politically. That's hope. Clearly, our vote determined the next president, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris on the ticket. That's hope. So I see more growth. I also see a pandemic, a health pandemic, which has made America humble somewhat. You know, whether you are behind the walls in Britain or the White House, the germ has no respect of persons. We had to learn to live differently. We're speaking virtually as opposed to physically, you know. I had to learn distance learning as opposed to face-to-face learning. And it exposed the people who were getting sick the most, Black and brown people. Because where we work, you know, we catch 3 buses from home to the bus stop, to the elevator, to the next bus going to where white people live. So you can't social distance on the bus. You can't stand 6 feet apart on the subway. So we end up working those conditions. And clearly, if the driver is sick, the driven is sick. If the cook is sick, the woman that cooks is sick. There must be healthcare for all. We must have some economic and healthcare base for everybody. Injustice is a threat to justice everywhere. That's the point there. Injustice is a threat to justice everywhere.
Very well said. And I mean, you were the first presidential candidate to talk about healthcare for all. You were the first to talk about subsidized child care and tuition-free higher education and full employment through infrastructural projects. What is the Jackson agenda for 2020? What 3 or 4 or 5 items would you like to see the federal government pursue to make progress?
The assured Americans that the Constitution right to vote. We don't have Constitution. We don't have the state's right to vote. It's a separate state elections. That's why you have these border conflicts today. We should all have a constitutional right to vote and should be protected. Secondly, health care for all. It's by need. And so insurance companies and the elite be damned unless you have health care for all. Those who don't have it threaten those who do have it. That universal education, because education becomes a tool. Strong minds break strong chains. And some emphasis on learning to live together as brothers and sisters, not dying apart as fools. Learn to we can advance the idea of coexistence and not co-annihilation. I'm also convinced we need a development bank. You know, the big banks, they're more profit. And anything that says they must invest in poor people is like an impediment to them. We need a development bank. In Europe, after the deficit after World War II, conventional banks could not redevelop. Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan was 50-year loans, 2% government secured. The inner cities, the rural white poor, development banks whose mission is development, long-term largest loans, will not get that from big banks. So clearly economic change, the idea of having development banks. We are a nation within a nation in so many ways.
Before I start going to some of these audience questions, because they're coming in and there's some really interesting ones, I want to say one final word about my book, I Am Somebody, Why Jesse Jackson Matters. I'm very proud of this book and honored to have written it. I hope everyone will go out and get a copy if you haven't already.
This is the best and most researched book ever done on me.
Oh, wow.
Research is phenomenal. The support the documentation is wonderful. And in fact, you came close enough to see it. Makes the book really does matter. It matters to me in a very special way.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Reverend. That's really a moving endorsement. In some ways, I wish, however, that I didn't feel the need to write it, because so many of these stories belong in the public consciousness. James Felder, who was a member of the South Carolina House of Representatives, and he's an author, you know, he said that this book should be in every library and school. At the risk of asking you a question that allows you to become self-indulgent, why do you think so many of the stories from your momentous and triumphant career, international and domestic, are neglected when we discuss politics and history?
Well, not fake news, but left out news. Well, we're to be covered. I remember one time talking to a journalist in Chicago. I was on the top 10 most admired Americans for 10 years. I said, there's not a local story about my bill on that list. He said, well, if there was a white person, will he run for governor? He said, you can't run for governor. You can't be that. And so when I was on the president, he would see the change coming. He said, I apologize. So much what we've done has not been covered in Chicago, not really. So when we went to get Goodman out of Syria, we negotiated the end to the fire strike in Chicago in 1980. The fire had been strike for 27 days, 27 people were killed. I've been negotiating from all those years. So I went to Syria because I know our movement has international authority in the world community. People around the world look to African Americans as challenging the big guys in the country. We've done a good job of doing that. And so we have an international stature as a movement. Dr. King internationalized our struggle.
Well, it's always a blessing to sit with you and talk. Let me go to some audience questions. We have one from Simon Gifford. I am sitting here with 6 of my 15-year-old students. What advice would you give to these young people?
See the world through a door, not through a pill. Don't see the world through racial terms. The world is multiracial. Learn more than one language, relate to more than one race. If you go into a school of one race, sit with the minorities. We all need each other. The weakest link, the broken link, jeopardizes the whole chain. Learn to live together. Become literate. Use your literacy to liberate, not just literacy to take advantage of people and private advancement. Use your literacy for development. So I can respect people in Europe and Africa at the same time. It's not a trade-off. We all matter.
Well, Reverend, one cause for hope today is you're getting a lot of attention today from teenagers. Well, we have one question from Millie, who's 14 years old, and she asks, how would you try to eliminate voter suppression?
Well, one, registered voters. You detect the suppression, for example, when you only vote one day, and that's like 30 days, that's suppression. You have too few voter machines, that's voter suppression. Use gerrymandering, the way you draw lines, annexation, a lot of road purchasing schemes to lock people out. I spoke to a college 4 or 5 years ago. 7,000 students on their campus and teachers. They moved the precinct 3 miles down the road. They had to walk down there and get a cab. People didn't go. Voter suppression. So it takes on those means. That's why when I take all was a form of voter suppression because it locked out too many people. Now our democracy is more inclusive, and Trump's supposed to feel threatened by an inclusion democracy.
There's 2 similar questions here, so I'm going to combine them into one. Catherine Farnham Deer asks, how important was your Christian faith in all that you achieved? And Cindy Kent asks, what is your favorite Bible verse? So if you want to answer both of those about your, and you're a minister, you're an ordained minister, something people often forget.
Well, I'll believe very much on the Chronicles. If my people will call by my name, will humble themselves, not bear armor, and pray and seek my face. You may never see God's face, but be trying to see it. Do the right thing and turn from your wicked ways. Racism is wicked. Gender violation is wicked. And you answer prayer, you hear from heaven. If my people call, that's important to me, it seems to me. Love one another as I love you. He used the love ethic to upset the Roman hierarchy, to love your enemies, in part because you may have done something to make your enemy your enemy, and maybe more sick than mean. A lot of people who don't like you, not because you've done something wrong, because they've been conditioned to disrespect you. You see what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah.
That's part of the developmental process. So my faith has been all to me because I learned to follow Jesus, not just admire Jesus. To admire him is to stand back with a muscular guy on the cross dying. Follow him is to be able to defend the prostitute. Well, I said, ooh, well, Jesus comes down and heard people laughing, a woman screaming. why are you killing this woman? I said, well, she broke the rules. She was having sex with another man. She said, well, she didn't have sex, but I said, who's her partner? Any among you who had sex with her, she could have tried to? And no one moved. She said, now, you go in peace. Following him is defending people who seem otherwise defenseless. People are hungry, he didn't offer prayer, offer food when they were hungry. Willing to confront the government, willing to die to live, because you couldn't stop Rome from crucifying him. Rome couldn't stop him from being resurrected. Martyrs, we love martyrs, but not marchers. Marchers create the climate for martyrdom. So Dr. King, it was bigger on April 5th than it was on April 4th. They was killed. Because Mandela in jail became so big, he bigger than jail, he exploded. He came out of jail and saved the country. So it seems to me that when we fight back in that way, my faith says if you just go on all your ways, he'll see you through. We may do it for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I believe joy comes in the morning. For us, November 4th this year was morning time. We're very dark on Trump. His actions, his behavior, his hostility, his meanness, in some sense, his economic exploitation. And yet, it was dark. Pandemic of violence, pandemic of the COVID-19. And yet, we voted, and joy came November 5th.
Yes, and speaking of what you say, I'll just jump in here before I give you another audience question. One of the stories that I tell in this book is it almost doubles as to what happens to dissident leaders. You were one of, and remain one of, if not the most effective dissident leaders in the United States. So we can learn about this campaign of slander from our major institutions to discredit you, which is what happened to King, and which is what happened to so many others.
It happened to Jesus. By what authority do you speak? Those who would dare be change agents must always face the hurl and rocks of the status quo. Those who see the world in bigger terms must guerrilla those who see the world in narrow terms. America, with all of our talk about democracy, from Ghana and then Nkrumah down to South Africa, we were on the wrong side of every battle path and liberation. There is a single gun for a single African. The folks themselves on their own name, they call communists and call this and all that. They fought. Now we accept their growth, their independence, colonialism. But our wing of the struggle in America, we would identify with Nkrumah and Zimbabwe and South Africa and Nigeria. We identify with those struggles.
Yeah, and that's, again, an international perspective with an orientation toward oppressed people. Switching topics a little bit, we have a very interesting question from Susan. Reverend Jackson has made many inspiring speeches. Do these come easily to him? And what advice can you give on getting the message across? I'm assuming the message for democracy and mutual aid and respect and peace and justice.
My speeches come out of situations. That's not abstract, you know. One must speak with convictions. Leaders of substance mold opinion. Don't just follow opinion, because I knew people needed health care, not limited by race. Everybody needed health care to live. And so health care for all. I spoke about that. War is tough, but peace is a resolution of war. It makes sense to me. To end racial limitations, that comes easy to me. So I speak out of my situation. So as an oppressed person, I grew up, I was born in the home, couldn't be born in the hospital, no room for blacks in the hospital. My mother was a maid working for white people. and how they got paid. She had to take what was left on the table and bring it home. And so my parents came from World War II and couldn't vote. Europeans could vote after D-Day. We couldn't vote when we got back home. So these battles have been given. We hear these battles. We fought it and we were winning. We were winning every day.
You know, one thing that we take for granted, those of you who, or those of us who are listening to you speak today, and those who listen to you speak around the world, is, you know, Martin Luther King, your friend, was assassinated. Medgar Evers was assassinated. Malcolm X was assassinated. Freedom riders, Goodman and Cheney, were killed. You fought for voting rights and for the end of Jim Crow during a time of great violence and murder and threat and death. And yet you're still here. You know, for that reason, among many, yours is a heroic life. Zoe, who's 15 years old, asks about that. She says, how did and do you find the courage to challenge racism, even though many have died trying?
Well, I have no choice. I cannot surrender to racism. I cannot fight it by becoming a racist myself. I have to have the antidote to racism, which is racial inclusion, and so the value of it. You know, they locked Jack Robinson out of baseball. They finally let him in. Went from 13 teams to 32. Football, baseball, opera. I mean, call the roll, more people included. The victory becomes more valid. And so we seek to have valid victories. And I'm convinced that we say love, love, hope, and charity. Originally, three is charity. I think the missing one is courage. You have love, hope, and charity. If you don't have courage, we won't put your foot in the water. Let's have the courage. Because cowardice can make good people buckle. Like today, Trump is trying to invalidate the election. Senators, strong men, women, congressmen, senators, they're scared they might lose. Out of their fear, out of their cowardice, they can't admit that he lost the election. They can't admit that people who are unemployed need assistance. They're scared, they're cowards. And so there's no future in cowardice. I think Kenneth's book, Profiles in Courage, somewhat sums it up. Those who are there to be courageous make a real difference in the world. I was in South Africa the day Mandela walked out of jail. I was in Cape Town, South Africa, walked out of jail that Sunday. Kings and queens sat in their beds looking at him. The prisoner freed the jailers, courage and convictions, and they're not afraid to die.
Courage and convictions. Those are certainly not words we would use to describe Trump, but Daisy, who's asking, you know, she asked two questions. I'm going to go ahead and read them both. Her first question is, how far back do you think Donald Trump's presidency pushed the work done by civil rights activists? Do you think that it allowed racists to be more vocal about their views? And then she also asks, what should we learn from the execution of Brandon Bernard?
That is inhumane, to be merciless and unforgiving. Those who would kill him without mercy, will mercy. Trump will mercy himself. He recommended 9 to 5 blacks be killed who were innocent, and they got free, still want them killed. He wants mercy. So let's have mercy by one yardstick, like the way to put it. I also think that you look at last one question again, because I really want to ask it.
Well, you answered about Brandon Bernard. The first part of the question was, how far back do you think Trump's presidency pushed the work done by civil rights activists? And do you think that he...
The irony is that he's helped the movement. Now, people who had stopped voting and given up on voting, they can come alive, fighting back. See, when you're under attack, you're in the hole, you have 3 options. You can adjust, you can resent, resist. Most people adjust, just go along with whatever's on their plate. Some people know better, but feel they don't have the power to change things. With George Floyd's death, for example, people came out of their fear bags, courageously marched out in the streets of America and really around the world. And so the result of that is that when you move together on a common sense of humanity, humanity prevails. If you fight back, that's all we're really trying to say. When we fight back, we win.
Well, Reverend, you're a great leader, and as we can see today, and we have viewers who are in their teens and viewers who are elderly, you're also a great teacher. And I try to capture many of your big moments in this book, but we have a question, and it'll be our final question for today's program. What do you see as the biggest moment in your history and why?
The big one. When I was able to give my mother my report card, making my mother happy was a big deal to me. You know, in terms of our political work, I suppose being working with Dr. King was a big moment in time, a moment in time. I learned so much sitting at his feet. I learned to see the world as he sees the world, as caring and loving with all its awesome potential. And then, of course, bringing Americans home from foreign jails. I ran for president in 84 and 88. When I was running, the press was quite cynical. The night I gave a complete speech and they couldn't break it up. The whole world responded. So those are big moments. When Barack Obama ran that night, it was big deal to me because it fulfilled a release of Black could win in America. And Kamala Harris, she was in 84, 88, she was campaigning for me in California as a law student in 88. And she's on a ticket. So I argued in 84, I said, if India got India, Thatcher got Britain, and Golda Meir got India, a woman should be on the ticket. Even whoever who did like my campaign, they agreed, so Israeli Ferrari on the ticket. Now as they come to Harris on the ticket as an African-American woman, and really accepted and respected. Barack had been the president. It means that if we will to fight back, and we're not cowards, and we're loving and caring. Loving and caring is penetrating. Use love, use care, don't surrender. And for God said, one thing worse than slavery is to adjust to it. And the worse than oppression is we must never be maladjusted to oppression and degradation. And treat other people. The most difficult rule in the Bible, the most difficult one is the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. That's a difficult one. It's the one people tend to violate. Mercy for themselves but not for others. You want just for other people, mercy for yourself. Mercy must be boundless. And you must always care.
Beautifully stated, Reverend. I remember when I asked you about that moment when Barack Obama won and camera caught you with tears in your eyes. You said you cried eloquently as always. You said, I cried tears for the moment and the movement. In the moment, it was tears of joy, and in the movement, it was tears of sadness because of all the people who weren't there to experience it. Well,
I was sitting there at Grant Park across from Johnson Publishing Company. We had been there 4 years before, tear gas. 68 Democratic Convention, Dr. King was dead, Robert Kennedy was dead. We were sad, and there was a big blow up. He walks across the stage that night as president. The moment, it was a big moment, big moment for America and really for the world. But then the people who made it happen couldn't afford to be there. The King and Medgar Evers, I wish they could have been there for 15 seconds. See through their labors. Pendleton Hamer, who made it all possible. Students many were sick and poor, couldn't get to Chicago that night. I thought about the movement in the moment. Thank God for allowing me to live to see. They say leaders often plant seeds with trees under whose shade they will never sit. I've been blessed to be along this run. I've been on this belt. I was jail 1960, 60 years. I've planted seeds and I've seen trees blossom. I planted that. That's good feeling, very gratifying.
Thank you, Reverend. The blessing of you having the ability to be a long distance runner is one in which I share the joy and the gratitude, and millions of others around the world share joy and gratitude in that. So, and also, we're grateful for you joining us today. Thank you so much. And thank you to the How To Academy. And if you're looking for stocking stuffers, I am somebody why Jesse Jackson matters. And Reverend Jackson also has a book called Keep Hope Alive, which is a collection of his speeches and sermons. So keep those in mind as we move into the holiday season, Christmas and Hanukkah.
Amazon.com.
That's right. So, all right. Well, that concludes. Thank you for joining us today, and everyone be safe and strong.
God bless you. Keep hope alive. Don't surrender. Don't surrender. Keep hope alive. Okay. Love you guys.
Absolutely.